I've been involved with the paranormal since even before birth. Things happen before birth. I don't give myself a title. There's a lot of people out there who call themselves exorcists. I am not an exorcist. I am not a demonologist, although I have studied a lot of things in that vein. I really don't feel like I have a title specifically. Just call myself an investigator, or I don't know, something like that. I can remember my parents telling me a story of something that had happened before I was born. And my parents are immigrants. They came from another country. And my father's kind of this big, buff, rough and tumble kind of man, is afraid of nothing. And one night when he was sleeping, and my mother was pregnant with me, he woke up to something on top of him. And he tried to punch at it. It disappeared. He jumped out of bed, he ran around, couldn't find anything. So that was the first story. Not long after that, I was born. And I was born with the veil over my face. And my mother describes how, while they were holding me, my face changed to that of an old woman. And of course, I was born bald. But during this transformation, I had a full head of hair in a bun. And they screamed, and everybody in the delivery room screamed. And they didn't charge for my birth. So things started at my birth. As far as those are the things that clearly I don't remember. But growing up, I had a ghost in the house that I referred to as spooky. And he would do things like turn on the lights. Okay, and this is the house I grew up in. And at the kitchen end of the house, there is no light switch. The only light switch is at the other end of the hallway. And it was very, very dark. And I would stand at the kitchen end and wait. And the light would turn on at the other end of the hallway when there was nobody there. So I could walk down the hallway in the light and not be scared. I would find coins, like pennies and such, made inside my bed, under the sheets, and little flowers on the bed. Many experiences as a young girl. I think the only one that I really found traumatic was back in the day, little girls used to have vanities. And mine had a drawer in the center. And I was in my bedroom, and the drawer opened by itself. And of course, that scared me. I don't know why that scared me and the lights turning on didn't, but that scared me. It opened, and then it closed again. And then I was frightened. But aside from that particular experience, most of them did not scare me. I have. Not in my home. I had a friend of mine that lived here, and about a year and a month ago, she hung herself in my backyard. After that, things went nuts in the house. Lights would turn off and on. While you were sitting right next to them, they'd turn on, they'd turn off. There was knocking on the walls. There was banging on the windows. Things were moving around. My cats absolutely, I have 4 cats, and they would not come in. They did not come into this house for 2 months. They would not step one toe in this house for 2 whole months. I was involved with an exorcism in the city of Norfolk a few years back. So that was really the closest I think I got to true evil.
Describe the exorcism.
Well, I have to go back and tell you about the woman that it was involved with. She was also a friend of mine, and she was part of a paranormal group that I had run. We kind of let the paranormal group go, but she continued to do it with other people. And she was working with a woman who she thought had a serious issue, a serious demonic issue. And my friend is the kind of person that wants to fix everything. So she was in the house, and this woman was being tormented. This woman was being pinched. She was being bit. She was being physically attacked. And from my understanding, she was an old woman. So my friend says, leave her alone. Come with me. And that was the beginning of the end for her, because it did. It would still go back and torment the other woman, but it also tormented my friend. And one night in the middle of the night, her son called me and told me to get over there now. So I jumped in my car and drove over there. And we actually started with prayers at that point. Now, my cell phone is filled with priests, rabbis, various different religious people. So as I'm there, I called one of them and I said, I need you. And he says, well, I can't come right now. And I said, so what do you want me to do? What do I need to do? And so he gave me instructions on certain prayers to do. And we spent most of that evening with her. It was me, her son, her husband, and her daughter going through a litany of different prayers. And at times, she seemed very much herself. And at other times, even the structure of her face would change. Her voice would change. And at one point, she looked at me and she says to me, you think you're strong, but you're not. And it was not her. This was during the time that it was clearly not her. And my response to her was, I don't have to be strong. It isn't me that's doing this. So that went on through most of the day. And the next day I had to go to work. So I went directly from her house to work. And after work, I went back. And in the morning, so this went on for a couple of days. In the morning, it was her. And she told me that she wanted to go to church. So while she was her, I thought, okay, let's get this done quick. So we tried to get her out of the house. Now, she may have weighed 110 pounds, maybe. Very slim woman. My son at the time was 18 or 19, and he's a very sturdy, muscular man. Her son was bigger than my son, and of course her husband does construction. We're talking 3 large, strong men. Could not carry her. We ended up, again, with very intense prayer for almost every step that we had to take to get her in the car. And when we got her in the car, I drove, and I was afraid that she was I'm trying to drive the car, and she is overpowering 3 men. I'm like, that's just what I need to do, is be behind the wheel. And this was near Easter time, on a weekend in Easter, on a Sunday. And every church we drove by was full of people. Obviously, we can't take her there. So I'm driving towards a chapel that is not a chapel that's in a church, or excuse me, a chapel that is in a hospital. Mm-hmm. And because that's the only place I can think of where there won't be people. Mm-hmm. But we happened to go by a particular church, and there was nobody. There was one car in the parking lot. So we whipped in, and while they all stayed in the car, I went and knocked on the door, and a woman opened the door, and it just so happened that the minister had just gotten married, and they were getting ready to have a party for him, and that's why there was no church service. So at that particular time, there was going to be later, but at that time there was no church service. And I told her what was going on, and I told her, I said that we need help. I said, she wants to go into the chapel. She wants to go be near Jesus. I said, okay. So we got her out of the car without too much trouble. We got her in the building without too much trouble. But getting her down the hall to the chapel, again, took every ounce of strength. And she kept saying, I want to go, I want to go, I want to go. But her body wouldn't go. And then once we got her in the chapel, we couldn't carry her. That was it. That was as far as we could get her. And again, constant prayer throughout all of this. Now, she happens to be Catholic, so we used Catholic prayers. But in an exorcism situation, you use the prayers that resonate with the person who is possessed. So if they were Jewish, you would use Jewish prayers. If they were Native American, you would use Native American prayers. You go with their faith base. This was not a Catholic church that we were in, but they were still the same prayers. Christian, it was a Christian church. And she started to crawl by herself. But every once in a while she would just not be able to move, and her body would take on various weird contortions. Eventually, the minister and his wife showed up. Now, the wife had recently come from Africa. She was a missionary in Africa. And over there, exorcism is much more prevalent. So she came in with a lot of experience and basically guided. It was her husband, the minister, and the wife, and 5 or 6 more elders in the church, and of course us. And she got a lot of relief that day, but it wasn't over. On TV, they show exorcism as, an hour, but in reality, it takes significantly longer than that. There's a movie that's called The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and that particular movie does a real good job with showing the length of time when it talks about the dates. Hers went on for months, and that's not uncommon. But once you break the grip, it takes constant work to keep it gone. And the instructions that my friend got was to play religious music in the house constantly. And they were given a booklet of prayers, and they were to go to church 2 times a week and become involved and really get that support for at least 90 days, which she didn't do. They did it for about 60 days, a little bit more than that. And right about the time of the 90-day mark, she shot herself in the head and died. Very, very traumatic for everybody involved, because it just seemed like such a waste. And we wished that she would have kept it up. And I would call her every day. Do you need anything? Do you need me to come over? Do you want me to pray? Do you want me to take you somewhere? And in the beginning, she would say yes. And then she would tell me, no, I've got this. We're doing this. And I'm like, are you still doing what you're supposed to be doing? She says yes. But she wasn't. I'm not sure what else to say about it. It's very traumatic.
I was just curious, why is it that exorcism is more prevalent in other countries and not here, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's because Americans have not really been very spiritual. They go through, when they go to church, it's rote memorization. If you've ever been in a church and you hear people saying the various different prayers, they're not saying them, they're reciting them. And that's just not the same. Whereas I think other countries are much more passionate about their faith. I think you first have to start with not letting them in. And there are different stages. You know, most of us, I think, have demons around us. Now, there are some people who have a lot more, and there's oppression. And if you've ever known someone who maybe drinks a lot, goes to bars a lot, does drugs, always seems to have ugly things going on in their life, I believe that a lot of that has to do with the demon looking for a way in. There are some people who think that if you get drunk, you're going to attract a demon. I'm not sure I believe that. But if you find yourself surrounded by people who have a very negative outlook on life, you attract negativity. So if you live your life in a negative way, you attract negativity. And that leaves an opening for you to bring it into your life. Because I deal with the paranormal so much, there are rules that pertain to my house. And one of them is you can never just, you know how you yell at the door, somebody knocks on the door and you yell, come on in? You don't do that here. People that I'm expecting, that I know, I tell them on the phone, I'm too lazy to get off the sofa. If you want to come in, just come in. Knock on the door and come on in. Otherwise, I'm going to have to get up and answer the door because I can't just yell, come in. And if I have gone to a case that's very ugly, I make sure that I do a blessing or a cleansing outside of the doors. It doesn't come home. There was one incident where we were in Cold Harbor, Virginia, where we got called in for a family that was having spontaneous fires in the house and various other things. But the fires were the part that really scared me. And just a lot of bad vibes. And I don't know how else to explain it. But my son was with me, and we stopped at one of the rest stops and did a cleansing and did a smudging there at the rest stop. And I always think, you know, people around us probably think we're crazy, but that's okay. I often leave my cleansing tools outside so that when I get home, everything I need is already out the door. And when I went with my friend that killed herself, the first time I was called, I called my son and I said, you know, go get my things, put them outside. I'll tell you about it when I get home. And that's exactly what happened. I make it a point to not bring anything into the house. Now, when we had a lot of activities going on in here, the person I believe that was involved with it was not a demon, it was a human being spirit. And she lived here. So she didn't need an invitation to come into the house. She already lived here. Her things were here. And during that time, she was very angry. I got slapped. I got pinched. My bed would shake. You could feel people sitting next to you, until we had like I said, a very, very large cleansing that went on here. I refer to myself as religiously eclectic. I was raised a Catholic, but that does not fit. There was too many things that they said that just I knew in my soul were not true. But some of them are. I believe that I have a Native American spirit guide, for lack of a better word, very strong Native American background kind of feeling, a lot of Buddhist, so Eastern European, and the Eastern religions, and a little bit of voodoo. So it's kind of a mixture. And if you look around my house, you see that. It's all over my house. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Santeria is a mixture of voodoo. And when they paint voodoo on TV, they paint it very ugly, and it really isn't. It's about calling upon your ancestors and paying homage to your ancestors to help you achieve what you need to do.
Yeah.
And it's a lot like what goes on with living people. It's like if you have an uncle who has a chainsaw and you need a tree cut down, you pick up the phone, you go, "Yo, uncle, I need a tree cut down. Can you bring your chainsaw over?" And he will say, "Sure, I'll bring it over, but you better have, iced tea when I get there." Well, if he shows up with his chainsaw and you don't have the iced tea, that's when the problem comes in. So it's kind of a negotiation with voodoo.
They love candies and stuff.
Candies, whiskey,
All
all kinds of delightful things.
Yeah.
With my particular group of friends, when we have any kind of a gathering together and we open up a bottle of some sort of alcoholic beverage, the first drink goes to Mother Earth, the family, the gods.
Yes.
And same thing with, if we smoke ceremonial cigars for various different things, because smoke has always kind of been a conduit between us and the spirit world. I don't necessarily buy into the common belief that all Ouija boards are bad. I think that it is about the person handling the Ouija board and the depth of their spirituality. It's about understanding the influences around them. So if you were in a situation where you spend a lot of time, again, we're going back to the oppression thing, where you're around people who have a lot of negativity, you're around people who do drugs, you're around a lot of negativity, and you pull out your Ouija board, you've already got the dark around you. So you're playing in the dark, so to speak. But there are other people who live their lives in the light. And they might dress in black and have, piercings all over, but they still walk in the light. And those people can grab a Ouija board and it's a completely different circumstance. So it's about the grounding of the person and how solidly they stand. The thing about demons is they don't use clocks.
Okay.
All right. So if you extended an invitation to a demon to enter your home 20 years ago, you were, I don't even know how old you are, but you're sitting around the campfire when you're, 12, and you're playing with the Ouija board, or you're doing a seance, because, we all do that, many, many years ago.
Yeah.
It can come back. That door is open, and it can choose to walk in anytime it chooses. They don't operate by the same clocks that we do. They also can go through bloodlines. For example, if your great-great-grandmother did something and the invitation's never revoked, the sins of the great-great-grandmother can fall upon the children of them later down the road. So, the trick is to walk in the light, to keep your eyes on spiritual. And I'm not talking about religion, and I'm not talking about Jesus or God or anything. My concept of God is very different than what you're going to read in your Bible.
Yeah.
And I do believe that Jesus was a true human being, an incredible prophet, and a way to the light, as was Muhammad and Buddha and many of the others. So I don't buy that, and that was one of the things with the Catholic Church that just didn't resonate with me, is that there's only one path. There's not. Well, there is. There's only one path, and that's on the light. Mm-hmm. But there's not just one teacher. Yeah. There's many teachers, and they all teach the same thing. Mm-hmm. If you've ever studied any other religions, they all teach the same thing. Paganism does, voodoo does, Muslim, Christianity, Judaism, everything. They all teach the same thing with slight differences,
Sure.
which I believe the differences are man-made creations. I have not met them. I am very, very close friends with their nephew, John Zaffis. One of the giggly stories, my son, I keep talking about my son because he's kind of a big part of my life. One day we were watching TV when he was young. He was maybe 8. And we were watching TV, and John came on the television, and my son goes, John Zaffis. John Zaffis. He says, Mom, where do I know that name from? I said, check the caller ID. And of course, John had called me, and my son was like, we know John Zaffis. I said, no, we don't. I do. You will, but not yet. So John is a little bit different than Ed and Lorraine. He learned from them. He was with them from a very young age and did many, many of their cases with them, namely the Haunting in Connecticut case. Are you familiar with that one with Carmen Reed? The movie The Conjuring, John was involved with that. Ed and Lorraine have a very Christian perspective, and everything that's negative in the world is a demon. They believe that anything but Christianity is wrong, and that everybody's going to hell and bring demons upon them if they don't follow this specific path. John's a little bit more flexible with that. He is definitely Christian, he is definitely Catholic, but he doesn't believe that, that everybody else is wrong. I'm not sure how to actually define that, because there are objects that have very negative attachments to them. Objects generally don't generally have personality. They don't have soul. So when you're dealing with a demon, it is taking over, it's controlling, I can't say your soul, but it's controlling your being. And since there's no life force in an object, but it can inhabit objects. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. Gotcha. So yes, objects can be haunted, and they can be. Not everything that's negative is a demon. If you have someone who is really unhappy, like what happened in my house, the person haunting my house was not a demon. It was a very unhappy, emotionally unstable human being, and the soul had not moved on. When someone dies, they don't suddenly become angels. You know, their wings don't sprout out of them and have them fly off into the, you know, to the sunset like you see on TV. They often will stick around and torment people because they're unhappy. It's just like when they were alive. And until they finally decide to move on, it can stay very ugly and very negative. It's, well, this is where I feel different about things than other people. Some people think that poltergeists have no intent, and that they're more of telekinetic. It's like, you know, if you have a teenager in the household and they're going through puberty, they think that their energy, the teenager's energy produces things. I don't believe that. I believe that we all walk around and we're a beacon of energy. Human beings are energy. Our bodies function with electricity. Biological fact. We're electrical. And I believe that wherever we go, we are putting out to the world a beacon. And with that beacon, we attract different things. So if you have a teenager, or you have someone who's very emotionally unstable, or blah, 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 whatever, their beacon is basically flashing, come mess with me, out to the world. And I believe that we have transient energies, not necessarily human energies, not necessarily demons, just transient energies that float around. And when they see that particular type of energy that attracts them, they come in, they have fun for a little while, and then they move on. Poltergeists are generally poltergeist haunting is usually fast. You know, it doesn't last a tremendously long time, months maybe, and then it's gone. It's also usually very violent or very active, not necessarily violent, but usually very active. So that's where you see things like furniture being moved around, things being thrown around. The Warrens have always taught that heavy objects, that human spirits cannot move heavy objects, that they don't have the strength to do that. So they would always see a poltergeist as being a demonic, because it is heavy things that can be moved. So that's a little bit of difference. Nobody really knows. There aren't any experts in the field. But like I said, I personally feel that poltergeists are not necessarily, they're not demons, and they're not necessarily telekinetic. I think they're just a burst of energy that happens to land somewhere and have fun. Or not fun if you're on the other side, but yeah. And that's just my personal feeling. The other thing that people talk a lot about is orbs. When you take a picture and you see a ball of light glowing in it, and there are some people who feel that those are ghosts, and there are other people who think that they're only dust, and it's a big controversy that goes back and forth, where the people that think they're ghosts think they'll have, you know, if there's an orb sitting on what appears in a two-dimensional picture, it appears it's sitting on their shoulder. And then the other people going, no, it was just floating between the camera lens and your shoulder, and that's why it looks like it's on your shoulder. I've had some experiences that are hard to say what's right and what's wrong. And an example, in the same house in Cold Harbor where they had the spontaneous fires, my paranormal group was outside, and we use a variety of different techniques. It's kind of like whatever feels right, we're going to at least try. And this particular night, we had two circumstances. We had an infrared camera, or a night vision camera, set up in the most active room. Now, this house was very clean, but we had the camera sitting in there, total darkness in this room. People couldn't see their hand in front of their face. I was sitting in the kitchen with the lights on, and I'm watching the monitor. And there's a lot of things floating around in this house. So I pick up the walkie-talkie and I tell one of the girls, I said, I want you to move a little bit to the left because I want you in the center of the camera view. And she says, okay. And I said, now take your left hand and put it out so that your palm is facing the ceiling, like a shelf. I said, now I want you to ask the orb to come and sit in your hand. And she did that, and she says it feels cold. And the time that she says it feels cold, you can see in the film it landing. And I made her do that 3 different times, alternating hands. And each time, as she said, I feel cold, the orb was landing. It's hard to discount that. And then there was another circumstance where we were outdoors, and one of the girls likes to use the dowsing rods. Now, personally, I can't use a dowsing rod. My hands don't function that well. But she was out there using the dowsing rods, and another girl was going around snapping photos. And there's a photograph of the one girl using the dowsing rods with them crossed, which in her communication means yes. So the dowsing rods are crossed. Another girl in the area has her hand sticking out into the middle of the frame of the camera, and the picture is taken. Now above her hand is an orb. And she was saying, it's cold right here when they took the picture. Again, to me, that's just really hard to discount. You have supporting documentation, other things going on. But then you see some pictures and the house is dirty and you can clearly see that's a bug or whatever. So some orbs to me could be spirit matter. Round is nature's shape. It's like if you have a raindrop that falls from the sky, if you could freeze it in time without gravity, it's round. So orbs are another controversy. I think if you're going to believe that an orb is a spirit, you have to have supporting evidence to go with it.